All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to Brain Milk, my podcast. I got Walter Rhein here. We got a good chat. I think right off the bat, we can't help but mention the Epstein kerfluffle going on. Pretty interesting news here. Happy Epstein Day, Epstein files getting release day to everybody who celebrates. Fingers crossed that this vote goes through. I think at like 4 p.m. is when Mike Johnson's going to swear in that Arizona Democrat. And, I don't know, hopefully like a second later, she signs that discharge petition. And then I don't know, procedurally, I guess they have to like make time in their schedule to like have this vote. But from what I understand with those rules that Mike Johnson passed, it's like discharge petition is very firmly in the rules that all the Republicans agreed to when Mike Johnson, when they agreed to let him become Speaker of the House after that long, arduous path for him to get the speakership. But what's your reactions to these breaking news that are probably going on right now as we're talking?
Well, if you've been reading Ellie Leonard, she's been going through because a lot of this stuff has already been out there, and I've lamented the fact that we live in an era where there's not like the independent media like there used to be, and that's all by design. All the
Yeah,
small little reporters, like the era of Woodward and Bernstein is gone, and it's almost like okay, now there's nobody out there to check to see what's going on. So Ellie Leonard is one of the people who's just been going through the transcripts that have already been available, and there's so much damning information just in those. And so
yeah,
yeah, like another one have specific names, including the names of our president, has already been prominently featured, and some of this stuff that's available. It, one theory that's been alive for a while is that a lot of what's going on, a lot of the shutdown, a lot of the fighting in the government is to hide these files, as if they keep thinking, because historically it's been the precedent. If you let something be forgotten for just a couple of days, the news cycle just forgets about it. No,
yeah,
even a
yeah.
gigantic scandal can be erased. And it feels like that's not going to be the case this time, fortunately.
Well, fingers crossed. There's reports that Trump is personally calling Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace right now, and who knows what he's like threatening or bribing them or attempting to bribe them with to change their vote. Now, I have heard also that like a lot of Republicans have kind of been like telling reporters like kind of like off the record or privately that there might be like just a cascade of Republican votes because if they get the votes to go through, a bunch of Republicans are not going to want to be like on the record for all of history with their legacies and their political careers of voting against this, especially if it's as bad as a lot of people are speculating. So hopefully Trump doesn't. I guess we'll notice if like Lauren Boebert's congressional district gets like some massive like $500 million bridge or some infrastructure project all of a sudden. We'll know why. you know.
Yeah. Oh, we'll see what happens. And it's no, it's just so hard to predict. But I mean, and even like too, it makes me almost wonder if all this investment in AI is so that they can pretend that the videos that they have on file were all fake. Like to what extent does this corruption? And it's just like nobody's arrested those people, so there's no reason to think this trafficking empire isn't still in operation. And I keep saying things like when you write an executive order to repeal birthright citizenship, you deprive a whole generation of kids of the protection of a nation. And we spent all
Yeah.
this money on ICE, and they're separating parents from kids, and they're losing people. And the Ukraine,
Yeah.
there's the International Criminal Court has an arrest warrant for Putin for trafficking kids. The president met with him on U.S. soil.
Yeah. Right.
So it's just like it's ongoing. So yeah, something's got to happen.
Yeah, it's nice to speculate, though. Do you think wouldn't it be nice if Trump was like not president in a month from now? Like if just
Cool.
those files come out and just like leak all of this crazy stuff that I mean, just public pressure, let alone like Republicans finally having their back to the wall of like truly defending all this stuff and looking the other way. Like surely if there's like a bunch of photos that come out of like Trump just with like a bunch of like naked teens, like I mean, can he be president? Should he be president? Like I mean. I wouldn't put it past Trump to like say, fuck it, you'll have to drag me out of the military or something, which I control. But it is nice to imagine that finally, and this is actually something I was thinking about because, Trump has been lucky because he commits all of his crimes like out in the open. Like he just admits to all of this like moral wrongdoing, just like with his truth
Yeah.
tweets and stuff. And like he goes into interviews and just, says things that like upset everything. His lawyers have been like carefully crafting and legal documents, kind of insulating shielding him from any of the damage of the things he does. So because everything's out in the open, there's no smoking guns. But finally, this is like a smoking gun that Trump has spent like literally years at this point, keeping from coming out into the public and being disclosed. So, for whatever reason, the media and then just voters in general, it's like that smoking gun aspect of something that's being hidden up and covered up is like way more damning in the court of public opinion than all the things Trump openly admits to. So hopefully, Trump's approval ratings right now are kind of like tanking and like just plummeting.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed.
Well, oh, yeah, I mean, that's a wonder. I mean, if that happened, but I think too, we have to keep our eyes because I've been reading Virginia Giuffre's book, and she's just mentioning all the politicians from all over the world that were involved. There's high ranking
Yeah,
people in politics at all levels, there's bankers, there's
right.
professors. So it's just like, it's not just going to be the downfall of one guy. I mean, I think, and it's certainly the president is not going to be the guy who accepts being the scapegoat for this whole thing. If he's going to go down,
Yeah.
he's going to take the whole world with
Hey,
him, which actually
I'm
would
cool
be
with
good.
that. Yeah, I think that
And
would be a nice cascade of events to happen.
oh, we might see though just massive. I don't know. I mean, this is all wishful thinking. But I don't think they can
Yeah,
hold it in anymore because the corruption is so big.
yeah, the
And
dam's
I think
breaking.
we're seeing the breaking point. Yeah, the American people, a lot of this stuff, like we talk about racism, and people are able to kind of push that off to it's not right that they do that. But if you're living in your little kind of safety bubble, you can be delusional about, the injustices of the world. But when it comes to like children being brutally raped, I think that kind of gets us all at a core level that's different than a lot of the other
Yeah.
things. So it has the impact to maybe make some. Uh, we might be at a transformative era. We'll see, but we have to all keep talking. No matter what happens in the next few days, we have to keep demanding justice for the
Yeah.
survivors.
Now, I was thinking about this. It's kind of sad that, like, Democrats caved in, and we can talk about that briefly too. But it sure would be nice if, these emails dropped while the government was still shut down, and then while public opinion was still on Democrats' side over the shutdown in terms of blaming Republicans and Trump more. But it sure would be nice if Democrats could start just saying, "Hey, look, they're keeping the government close to protect these pedophiles, these rapists, sex traffickers." So, once again, it's like Democrat. A lot of people have been saying that
Yeah,
Democrats never miss the opportunity to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And man, it sure would make for great
yeah,
politics if. And this is something that's annoying me. Like right now, it's like especially when all the bad press came out about Democrats caving in and it's like, how about you distract and every Democrat in Congress goes out in front of the Capitol and just starts protesting, like doing a filibuster on live television outside the steps of the Congress, just saying, release the files now, seat that Arizona Democrat now. It's like, why are they
yeah,
so bad at
yeah,
communications and, like the kind of media war of public opinion? Like, why are they not doing that right now? Why is TV not just filled with Democrats just straight up like stalling every aspect of government that they can until, the Epstein files finally get released?
yeah. That comes from their adherence to decorum that is no
Yeah.
longer valid in our current
Yeah.
time, which is just. And again, we were kind of talking about like, if you're these gated community Democrats who have your health care because they get universal health care, right? Even though they complain
Yeah.
like universal health care is bad, they
Yeah.
get it, and it's like
They get a
fine
lot
for
of
them.
socialist benefits in Congress, despite how much they say they hate
Absolutely.
socialism.
And I keep saying it's like start saying let's end socialism for the rich. Like make that your
Yeah,
platform
right.
because it's like the rich get billions and billions and PPP loans and bailouts and subsidies and they just get all this money. The only reason billionaires exist because the US government hands them billions of dollars. That's the whole platform. But you're right. I mean, we did see prior to the shutdown agreement being reached that Hakeem Jeffries came out and he's like, they're running a pedophile protection plan. And then I see just
Yeah.
the president of Colombia, I think it was, who just said the same thing. So that's starting to enter the world media. This regime
Yeah, right.
is a worldwide pedophile protection. But so maybe we could speculate. This is all speculation, but maybe they were willing to agree to end the shutdown with the appearance of caving because they knew this was coming. Because we did have
Yeah.
to get, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Grojava, signed in, and so there's no more excuses to not, get that discharge
Right.
petition. So who knows? Who knows?
Hopefully, I mean that's a good thing
Yeah.
because we might not be here. But it's also annoying. Like, how long have these Democrats on that committee that had those emails been sitting on that? Like, wouldn't it have been nice to have that prior to, I don't know,
Yeah.
Tuesday, like the election last Tuesday? You know?
That's something I have to verify too, because I was that under seal until like this January? Was that under judicial seal? All the information, I think, and it's. I
Maybe.
thought I'd read that where we're sort of like because the Democrats still have this appalling tendency to like follow the law like excessively, like
Yeah.
like we have to absolutely, and it's like
Right.
at some point when it's like let's let some because there's a lot of people that have seen these videos. There's a lot of people who've seen what. First of all the survivors know what went
Yeah.
on that island. All the survivors, all the culprits knew what went on that
Right.
island. And then they made all those videos, is what they
Yeah.
say that he was famous. Epstein was famous for blackmailing him. So presumably, there's a ton of FBI agents. I think I saw one lawyer come forward and say, "You haven't seen it. I've seen it. I'm
Yeah.
current," because they can't. I mean, these lawyers they can't reveal it because then they'll get
Right.
disbarred. But I think
And lose the
it's at that
cases. Yeah.
breaking point where
Right.
this is yeah. But it's out. I mean, but it's outside. Like this situation is such corruption on such a level that it has broken our
Yeah.
whole legal system essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine that somebody still got all those files that Epstein had. Like, I would imagine that sex trafficking ring and the blackmail operations didn't stop with Epstein, right? Like, maybe even Trump, I don't know. Like,
Yes.
he was very good friends with Epstein. It was, Bill Barr that kind of did a lot of those machinations. It was people that Trump put into his first and second administrations that, gave
Yeah.
Epstein that sweetheart deal to begin with. There's a lot of speculation that, maybe he's an Israeli agent or something like that. And, how do you commit so many crimes for so long with so many big people unless there's kind of bigger elements at play.
Yeah, I think it just emphasizes, and we've known that there's these injustices in our judicial system. If you have money, you can use the appeal system. We
Yeah.
saw it happen in the lead up to the election. Where the guy he was facing charges of election fraud. I mean, remember,
Yeah.
this is a president who he's a convicted felon. It's an election fraud case. It was
Yeah.
fraud in relationship to paying off. So that his 34 felony counts of election fraud, facing charges for election fraud in 2020, and then it's just sort of like all that just goes away. He was established by court as an insurrectionist. He shouldn't have been on the ballot for that.
Yeah.
But our judicial system has been eroded to the point where people who are rich can do whatever they want. We've seen the
Yeah.
transfer of wealth to a small group of people. They've exploited this system. And I think there's so much hubris involved with these. They think they're gods. They think they're about beyond, any kind of accountability. And I think they've just gotten over their skis. And I think we're going to see that because we're seeing that. I mean, since the election, we're kind of coming to a realization how much power we, the people, actually do have. And I didn't think we had this power. And, these demonstrations are doing a lot, just refusing to because we know what's wrong, and it's wrong
Yeah.
to
Right.
brutally rape little kids, and nobody wants that. That has to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll hear me on record saying that that's wrong and bad.
I'm against that.
Yeah.
That has
Right.
to end.
But yeah, any other current events that you want to mention briefly? We kind of had an idea to talk about a little bit about like democratic strategies and things like that. So, any last
Yeah.
topical news that you want to bring up first?
Yeah, what you were saying kind of segues into that because it's like, why are the Democrats? Because the Democrats could be doing more right now, exactly as you said, and they should be going out and using their platform to just kind of push this because this is,
Yeah.
the other side is doing, and just like the messaging, and there's just this messaging gap, like the right wing messaging is so powerful and constant in the form of
Yeah.
bots. And I was just reflecting how nobody ever writes an article that it's flooded with bots that say how great universal healthcare would be because nobody's funding that and
Yeah.
supporting that, and that's
Right.
the gap of
Yeah.
influence that we need to fill.
Yeah. Even Nancy Mace, apparently, like she's had like such high staff turnover, and a lot of her like chiefs of staff that have quit are said like she's just obsessed with her image, and that she like made her staff like run a lot of Twitter bots to just write a bunch of tweets about herself. And so like there's that idea. It's almost like a dystopian thing, but it's like sometimes like you put something out on the internet, and like, did anyone real read that? Is anyone who liked that and commented a real person? Or like eventually
Yep.
will the internet just be nothing but bots talking to bots?
And yeah, I've been talking about that. I talked to a couple journalists, how we've kind of in the end of the investigative reporters. And yeah, I mean, that influence is out there. The influence of AI is out there. And I think people are slowly waking up to the fact of like social media does not represent our reality. The people on there are not real human beings, but it has already cost us a couple elections. I got to go put the dog out. So I'll have to leave you for 1 second.
Okay, gotcha. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're going to start talking about a little bit more of the political aspects of the Democratic Party and maybe some lessons from last Tuesday's election. We kind of have me and Walter kind of have not necessarily disagreement, but just kind of different topics to bring up about like what Democrats maybe should be doing or what would make for a happier midterm election next November. So you wanna start off with what you were talking about?
Yeah, sorry about that. My poor guy. He was over there and it was like distracting me. He's like, beep, beep, beep. I've got a bell set up so the dog can do that. But yeah, I was thinking about this because it's interesting because it's so important to hear different viewpoints. So I thank you for talking to me. And it's like I'm Gen X, and I think you said you're millennial. So it's so
Hardcore
important
millennial,
for us
yeah.
to have the yeah, and it's just so important just to see where we're coming from. And I do this so much, like different diverse viewpoints and backgrounds, and seeing how people think about things. And like bit by bit, you start kind of assembling the actual structure of what's confronting us. And
So you're
I've been thinking
saying
ever
at
since
the
I
end of
talked
this
to you
talk,
during our movie.
you're saying at the end of this talk, we'll still have all of the Democrats' problems, and we'll have a great midterm.
Well, because the theme is, like who belongs in the Big Tent, because this is what the Democrats say. But there's so much infighting always, and and then we get to that idea of like the purity tests. But it frustrates me that they'll say that and they'll say vote blue no matter who, but then Zoran Mandani wins a primary and the establishment is completely against them. So I just want to like explore that reality of who is welcome in the Democrats' Big Tent. Because it seems to me that they make all kinds of space for like these castaway Republicans that can't even win an election
Yeah,
as a Republican anymore. It's
yeah,
like these are unpopular politicians and we're listening to them. But then like a Democrat like Mamdani who wins despite the efforts of the Democrats, there's no space for him. So that's kind of like the area I'm at and what the reality is versus what the narrative is, which gets back to that bot thing we were talking about because it's hard to sort through and figure out who our true allies are.
yeah. I mean, do you think we're just kind of in the middle of like a big political realignment? Like you can go to Wikipedia and there's been like 7 or 8, like depending on who you ask, like major realignments in American history. And like obviously like
I
from
think so.
Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and then you get Jefferson's kind of like Democratic Republican Party, and then Jackson's a major like shifting, and then you get obviously the birth of the Republican Party that's like anti-slavery and extremely like northern city,
Yeah.
like especially like by today's standards, like the Republicans of the 1850s, 60s, 70s,
Yep.
really up until about Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, where the parties kind of shift again, where like Republicans stop being the party of like northern big cities and industry,
Yeah.
and then switch to a much more conservative, like southern based, kind of more of the rural urban divide that we have today.
Yeah. And I mean, the Republicans today want to claim Lincoln, but I'm just like, he was progressive. If you want to call Lincoln anything,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
progressive.
Yeah,
Because
I
like
always think about that. I've written
human
about that,
beings.
that like the Lincoln's platform in 1864 was like free citizenship rights for any immigrant that
Yeah.
like can arrive on the American shore, right? They were all about
Yeah.
like tariffs protecting the big industries. They were about giving black people rights, and like the earliest like very like national civic rights fights were all those early Republicans. And you look at their like platform by today's standards, you'd be like this commie pinko communist Lincoln,
Yeah.
but they want to take credit for that platform that has nothing to do with today's Republican politics.
Yeah, and if you look at Eisenhower's platform, it aligns with AOC's platform. And people always have to
Yeah,
remember too, like there is zero liberal representation in the United States. Like if you go other parts of the world, you will find like the conservative party in other parts of the world that would never suggest taking away universal health care.
right.
And we barely have people that can even suggest it. So we're the whole nation is to the right of center here. And I think that's an argument, but I think the Democratic Party, the Democratic establishment, It just really feels to me like, yeah, they make so much money from their various corporate donors, including the people that profit off our healthcare. They don't even want to talk about something like universal. How could that not be a winning platform? I don't like paying thousands of dollars a month just for the privilege of paying another thousand when I actually get sick. If we actually
Yeah.
started talking about it, and I think it's important for us who are like the progressive media or the fringe media or whatever you want to call it to just normalize this demand. I've been saying lately, anybody against universal healthcare is corrupt. They're corrupt because they're exploiting human pain for profit. And it's just like we have to change that narrative because they have the anti-socialism narrative, and it's critical for us to push back on it because it's literally getting people killed.
Yeah, and you look at like on a lot of those things, is Republicans are always saying, "Oh, like if we do these things that like progressives really want, we'll start having like people dying for not having health care. They'll
Yeah.
have to wait forever." And it's like all the things that they like doomscape about like progressive policies are the things that capitalism is doing right now. Like a lot of people don't have health insurance. If it wasn't for like Obamacare, there's like 24 or 25 million people on Obamacare right now. So if we get rid of these subsidies, they will not have insurance. They're not getting their insurance through their jobs, which that's what Republicans always say. Just get a job, you bum. But it's like there's a lot of self-employed people that don't have health insurance through their job because they're their own employer and don't make enough money to like have health insurance without some kind of like public option, which Obamacare is, you're right, it's like a pretty center right kind of idea compared to a lot of European countries, especially in Scandinavia, which is always topping the list of like happiest countries with the people most enamored with their government being effective and dynamic in terms of like solving people's problems.
It always confuses me too how the healthcare industry doesn't use its lobbyists to insist on protecting the affordable because they're the ones getting all the money from it. They're it's like this the subsidies aren't going to we the people. They're going straight to these healthcare, bigwigs. It's just
Yeah,
bizarre to me. It's like because at some point I don't understand. And when I was talking with Will Fullwood today, we just don't know. Like what's going on in these rooms where these rich people get together and talk about how they're going to torment us. And it's like, yeah, how is it supposed to work that they're not going to the bat to save? Because once the premiums get expensive, it's more than just the people, it's more than just the subsidies the healthcare industry is not going to get. A lot of people are going to be canceling their insurance, so they're not going to be able to pay either. And then that's going to lead to premiums going up again and another round
yeah.
of cancellation.
And the
So it's
government
going to
spending
collapse.
more money because people who don't have health insurance, it's the government that's the backstop that has to pay for all of that. So basically, and this is something that always annoys me. When you talk to Republicans about what healthcare policy should be, they'll always agree, yeah, if someone's going to die on the street, they should take them into the hospital and cure them. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
what you are describing is that we will only help people at the last stop of their healthcare journey at the point where it is most expensive because now you're doing like all these like Herculean efforts to keep these actively dying people alive when instead you could have spent like a $20 copay on some meeting like 20 years ago to get them to like stop smoking or to take care of their like high blood pressure way early before they're actively having a heart attack and dying like right there on the street, and now an ambulance has to pick them up, not get paid for. All the doctors have to do all these procedures that then the hospital
Yeah.
just bills the government essentially.
Republicans are like, yeah, they always go by this philosophy of like, well, let's save money on our budget by not getting our oil changed on our car, And then it's like, yeah, you save
Yeah, right.
$100 there, but then your motor
Yeah,
blows up. And it's
yeah.
like
Now
everything
you
that
have to
they
pay
do
10
is like,
grand for a new car. Yeah,
and it's that
that's
that
very
goes
true.
into it too. So,
And in
but
America,
yeah,
it's
I
weird
don't know
because you
what
get
really works.
I was going to say in America, it's weird because you get that like Christian aspect of like, especially conservative politics, where it's like, this is a Christian government. And it's like, it's hard to imagine that like, if like, let's say Caesar had, invited Jesus to his house, to his mansion and be like, Jesus, I have this idea. Should we offer all the poor people of the Roman Empire health insurance, to go to like the
Yeah,
doctor or whatever? Like, do you imagine Jesus would be like, no, fuck them. They need to get jobs because they're lazy. I think what we should do is give tax breaks to all the rich Romans in the empire, and then it'll trickle down,
yeah.
jobs and benefits and health insurance to all the poor people. It's like if we're a Christian country, it's like I don't imagine Jesus would take that particular view.
I keep saying we need to go to our peace demonstrations dressed as Jesus and have signs that say Jesus loves you, except Republicans. Hold up a
Yeah, right.
cross.
I love those memes about
Well, then we'll
Republican
get the
Jesus.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, then at least we get the memes too when the riot police come to beat us. It's like the Republican riot police beating, everybody
Yeah.
dressed as Jesus. So
Yeah, right.
maybe that'd change some hearts.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Speaking
the,
of
the
that,
one where the guy's shooting at the
yeah.
priest.
Oh yeah, that's a great image. Priests with the collars and stuff getting shot in the head with rubber bullets for protesting what
Yeah,
ostensibly are Christian values of like let's help the poor and downtrodden.
yeah. But
What do you
you
think?
know, it
What do
always
you think?
comes back.
I was going to say, what do you think Democrats should do about this in terms of their elections? Then, like, what would you like to see Democrats in the midterms? What kind of policy
Yeah.
positions, or like, I guess, Democratic aesthetics should they adopt for the election?
And it's just because it's so complicated. Because even after the election, like there's these narratives the establishment puts into place. And this is, I think, a big thing for us to fight against. And the first thing I think is those of us who criticize the Democratic establishment, it's not because we're trying to sabotage the party. And it's almost like if you don't go in alignment with what they say to do, like James Carville's got to go. He's wrong. Because we just straight look at this establishment Democrats, the centrist Democrats, they've lost 2 out of 3 of the last presidential elections. They keep losing. It's only when they swing progressive. So, number one, I guess, is that their lie of we can't go too far left, which means they always surrender territory farther and farther to the right.
Yeah,
And I think that's been proven again and again and again that it's a lie. And then still we see the Democratic establishment try to, oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene is switching sides. Let's have a redemption tour for her.
yeah,
Adam Kinzinger is changing sides. Let's have
yeah.
a redemption tour for him. Liz Cheney's switched. She's among us now. And you got other people like, what the fuck? Those people, all they've done in their whole career is work against us. They're not part of, they can just retire and we'll bring in new voices that actually work for us. So I think that's kind of my central perspective.
No, I mean, I'll admit, like when Kamala Harris was running for president in 2024,
Ah,
I thought that was probably a good idea to campaign, and maybe not do as much as she did with like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, but like I did think that was a good strategy. I thought it would give a permission structure for a lot of Republicans to hold their noses and finally vote for Democrat because they, I don't know, are patriotic to the Constitution and don't want a convicted felon and insurrectionist to become president again. But I was wrong about that. Like it didn't really sway that many votes. And to your point, it's like 8 million Biden voters didn't vote for Kamala Harris, so it kind of like destroyed the enthusiasm quite a bit. Now, some of that obviously. I would say, racism and sexism definitely played
mhm.
a larger than 0% effect on, changing the electorate. I think, and I think a good example too of this is like, these mainstream Democrats that poll test everything. They have all the groups, so they have to do the land acknowledgments. They have to include like 70 groups of people on every answer. And everything comes across as just incredibly inauthentic because they're not a real person just reacting to things. They're hedging everything they say with some kind of like, giant, like let's address everything in every single answer that we give, and then everyone checks out. And I talked about this on that podcast I did with Adrian Polk, but so sorry if it's repetitive if people will listen to that too. But the idea that um, oh crap, I guess I lost my train of thought there. But I think it comes to, oh yeah, this is what I was going to say is like the idea that so much of the election really came down to like who will be better on a 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, Trump or Kamala Harris. And obviously Trump is better because he's a moron and doesn't know much, so he can get right on that like uneducated level with Joe Rogan. But also Trump just says anything that comes to his head, and people mistake that authenticity for like leadership, which in terms of Trump is not a good idea because he's a village idiot who doesn't know anything and frankly doesn't care about anything if it's not like plated in gold and or telling him
Yeah,
he's a genius, the biggest deal maker that ever lived in this universe. You know what I mean? So it's like
yeah,
Democrats
yeah,
do have this problem where they're trying so hard to be everything for everybody that, it's like that idea of Bill Clinton with the Sister Soldier moment. At some point, you got to tell some part of your electorate, fuck no, shut the fuck up. I'm trying to win an election in the entire country, be president for everybody. And I don't know. Any reactions
yeah.
to that?
Well, you made one word you said, permission structure. I thought that was a really good comment. And yeah, I mean, during the election, I saw her with Cheney, and that my feeling was I didn't like it. But then I'm like, intellectually, then I'm like, like just what you said, maybe if that makes a few people come to the other side. But I think that's the fundamental problem with the Democrats is that they don't even try for the people that don't vote at all. And And this drops out of there's no accountability ever for people like Carville. I was reflecting how there's been a lot of people with Kamala Harris. Carville come out. He's like, nobody wants to hear from Kamala Harris. And I'm like, I want to hear from her. But then I'm like, did they ever do that for Hillary Clinton when she lost? Where they're like, nobody wants to hear from, like, she's allowed to remain a
I think
political
people
figure,
did
but
that
the
to Hillary.
establishment,
My
a
memory
few
is
people did.
everyone. Yeah, my memory is everyone was like Hillary Clinton, shut the fuck up, get out of
Yeah.
politics. Like you just lost to Trump. You're like that third way Democrats where you're basically, obviously Bill Clinton is the one who. But I guess it's a complicated thing. You can't argue that Bill Clinton like was that third kind of like center right kind of Democratic coalition.
Yeah.
But he won two elections and was like pretty popular and pretty successful for the most part in terms of a lot of his like policies. It didn't work out the way ultimately people expected. I think, NATO, there was, or not NATO, but NAFTA, there was a big reaction kind of against a lot of the seemingly anti-union policies that brought about. But, I guess you can't argue that it did, especially in terms of the idea of free trade with Republicans, it did lead to more global trade. It probably made America quite more prosperous as a nation. But, the problem is Democrats have these ideas and it's good things for like America in terms of like the geopolitics and the long-term game. But then it's Republicans just constantly like obstruct any effort to help the people that are the losers in some
Yeah.
of these deals and situations. Republicans like just fight against any aspect to give the people who lose their jobs or lose their insurance from any other big plan that Democrats do. It kind of
Yeah.
it kind of sucks. And then Democrats do the big thing. It's pretty substantial structural change. But then obviously there's some losers that will get hurt by it. But then our government just doesn't react to that and help them. And part of it is just Republicans don't want the government to exist, don't want the government to have any money, don't want the government to tax people to raise money to solve any of these problems. So Democrats kind of get fucked on like both ends of that.
I think though too, like the establishment Democrats, there is some division by design to retain power. I think they play a really dangerous game. And I mean, because you could kind of see, like some people were saying, if Kamala had been allowed to push her opponent, I don't like to say his name, into narcissistic collapse, like you could make that guy freak out. And you just
Yeah.
continue to push him. And it's like, well, you're a loser, you're weak, you've never achieved anything. He'll flip out, and it's sort of like she came really close, but then it was
Yeah.
almost like in adherence to that decorum. And again, I think that was the pressure from this big tent idea.
Yeah.
But their
Right.
big tent, like the establishment big tent, does not include progressives. I mean, we keep forgetting this. And the fact is, like, you might think, and like Kinzinger, like, okay, he's saying some good things, and I appreciate some of the work he's doing, but he needs to come out and be like a pro universal healthcare guy. And they have to also apologize for some of the horrible things. Like I like that Marjorie Taylor Greene is going around and threatening to blow up this Epstein thing and read all the names on the House floor. That's great. But she's said very racist things and she's harassed like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we can't just like, oh, they did one thing, everything, it's a clean slate now. Because even though, I'm always going to vote for the Democratic candidate. And I try to have to put my mind in the place of some people where they're just like, I'm not going to vote for anybody. And we just have to accept, we can't shame those people that aren't going to vote because there's nobody that doesn't represent them, right? And too often it's like, you guys better wake the fuck up. You better get involved. And it's just like, well, maybe what we should do is run a candidate that hasn't been accused of sexual misconduct, even though it's a lesser extent than the other guy, but because we did in the Cuomo issue, the establishment's back in Cuomo. I mean, we can't run a guy like that. And there are people, if that's the only candidate, they're just like, fine, I'm not voting. And I don't agree with that choice, but we have to accept that some people think like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the enthusiasm issues that Democrats have, that's a big thing. It's like you've got to give people, it's like the idea that Democrats are just Republican light, where they're like they do a lot of the
Hmm.
same policies as Republicans, which that's not totally fair, but I get the public perception of that. So it's like they're kind of like Republicans light that are more polite, but still just doing the same things. But I don't know. But it's interesting. We're such a diverse country. Like Manhattan, that just voted in Mamdani, is a very different place than a rural Arkansas Democrat that's trying to
Yeah.
run for like governor or a representative somewhere for like a bunch of farmers in like rural Oklahoma. So it's like, in terms of like the Big Tent thing, I think my takeaway from this last round of elections is that, the governors in Virginia and New Jersey who just won were right for their districts and states, right? Mamdani was right for New York City. And so in terms of like my idea of the Big Tent is I think Democrats should just, stop having like any litmus test at all and just get the candidates that will get attention, however that attention comes. If you want to get in the mud and just like make your whole race about calling, your Republicans like pedophile protectors, and just like really get in the mud. Or like,
Yeah.
obviously that was not going to work in a statewide Virginia governor race, right? So my idea
I
of the
don't.
Big Tent
Yeah.
is maybe more of just like literally a big tent. Let's have a lot of Democrats that maybe will disagree with both of us like 90% of the time. Or sorry, but yeah, they'll agree with us 90% of the time, but maybe on abortion, guns, farming subsidies, like you name it, there's like to those local races that if they don't take those positions, they're not going to win. Democrats won't get a majority. We won't be able to help any minority group or anybody, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point though, because we're making assumptions about what's going to work in these rural areas, right? And because I live in, in a I'm in Derrick Van Orden's county.
Hmm.
I live there, and I know what the people are like here. But I often get, and like when I'm attacked when I write something, it's often from what I call the gated community liberals, guys that lived in blue
Yeah, yeah.
cities and blue states. And they're sitting there telling me, progressive ideas are not popular in red areas. I'm like, I'm in a red area. Nobody's here is happy with how much they pay for healthcare. So a lot of times this sounds real good. It's like, yeah, let's go to these. And the establishment does it, but there's always this perversion. Like the idea of big tent. Yes, that sounds really good. The reality of Big Tent from the establishment is they don't want progressives in there. They don't want certain groups.
Yeah,
They're
right.
happy to bring in like conservatives, but they don't care about anybody who is liberal. And with the rural areas, yeah, what you said sounds great too. Yes, we absolutely should run the candidates who know those areas. But as a person who lives in a red area, I can tell you the establishment won't listen to me. They won't listen when I say, no, this actually does work because they draw a hard line. The Democratic establishment does. It says absolutely no universal health care, nothing of that order. They don't want to go there. They do. They want to be Republican light. They want all the corruption. And you almost see like with Schumer, where he's like mad at Republicans for not liking him more because all of his policies line up. So many of them line up and they help so much, like the Republicans, and then they just hate him. And I know that there's a lot more overlap between Republicans and progressives than anybody wants to recognize. And I think we talked about this before, but
Yeah.
after Clinton, when she lost, instantly they're like, well, it's Bernie Sanders' fault. All those Bernie bros turned
Yeah,
and
right.
voted Republican. It's like what you just said is Republicans like progressive ideas. I mean, you said it in this way of like betrayal, but on the other
Yeah.
side of interpreting that, you're acknowledging social, the democratic socialism will work in
Yeah.
rural areas.
Now, I voted for Bernie in the 2016 primary, and but that goes back to my point. Is like he had enthusiasm. Like right now, with the information age being
Mhm.
so digital and so fractured with the internet and everything, and of course, like Democrats just don't even have any kind of real, like straight up liberal, like
Yeah.
not to say state
Then
news or anything, but like compared to Fox News and OAN, where you just have this like massive apparatus of just like all the Republicans get their marching orders from what's on Fox News each day. And Fox News does not like literally, is like basically in bed with Republican candidates, especially the higher up you go in the hierarchy of elections. Like with Trump, they were literally feeding like interview questions to him. I believe they got caught.
yeah.
They showed him like Biden's ads before Biden's ad went on air on their channel. So like,
Yeah.
I think in this day and age, like enthusiasm is maybe almost the only thing that matters because people they don't read newspapers anymore. We don't have the same monoculture that we
Yeah.
used to have. We don't even live in the same realities. Like if you watch Fox, like I looked up today with all this Epstein stuff, the number one big headline article on Fox News's website was about colleges and DEI. So it's like the people who just get their news from Fox News are
Yep.
not live. It's like Earth 2. They don't live in the same reality. But then somebody like Bernie comes around with like real enthusiasm, real messaging. He had influencers that really got his messages across. And like, I mean, you like tons of Republicans and conservatives were interviewed. Like, I like Bernie. I'd vote for Bernie because I trust him, because he's authentic, because he says what, he believes. And even that like socialism idea, like literally no one has done more than Bernie Sanders in the last like generation of politics to make a lot of these And even Bernie is like still like relatively, center right compared to a lot of European countries.
Hmm.
Like you were saying
Hmm.
earlier, like, Republicans in Denmark and Sweden are not like calling for ending all healthcare subsidies for their people. Like that would be ridiculous, a non-starter. It would get them all kicked out of office immediately.
Oh, and I think it's something I was just thinking it's like we're playing tennis, but only on one side of the court, right? There's the line. It's like we're just, and even whether we go Democrat or Republican, it's always on the same side of the court. And it's also too like they say this, I say that. They say this, I say that. And I think what you said too is really important, like establishing the progressive media. And I've been deliberately going out and sending a lot of invites to progressive candidates because they don't get any media time, and they'll come and talk to me. But it's like the establishment Democrats could build up my platform. They could build up your platform. But what they would rather do is ask for donations from us, and then they go and spend those donations for ads on Fox News, and that pisses me off, frankly. Like they're so deliberate. Um, we should theoretically have our left wing, thought think tanks out there. Those should be public schools, right? And universities. And when I was talking to Zuri Stevens about this, she says, universities, and that's why the right is so anti-education in any form. But Zuri says, a lot of these people they go from like a rural town. This is true of me. The first time you're actually exposed to new ideas and new thinking and new way of doing things and humanizing other people is when you go
Yeah.
to university. And so then the right, they have these, like the whatever the thing is called, America First that they run around or Thought Leader USA. What's the one? I forget. But they go to the college campuses and they just lie and they undermine. They're trying to undermine the access to critical thinking. So that's an ongoing issue that has to be fixed too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Democrats suck at the media, but I just don't know. I think about this a lot in terms of a Democratic Fox News. Like, it just can't happen. You're right. Like, people constantly blame CNN and MSNBC, but they have tons of conservatives and Republicans. And, that's how they kind of get their clicks when, like, the shouting matches on CNN, where you just get like that, like the pro Trump guy that just cannot ever admit one thing Trump did was maybe immoral or
Yeah.
unthoughtful, or
Yeah.
mean. But, I don't think liberals even would want that. Like, crooked media has done that a little bit, but they're not giant. MSNBC kind of like when they started to kind of be a more liberal viewing thing, but it doesn't get the numbers or the money that Fox News does, because I think liberal people are just generally maybe more curious about the world, and they're not prone to just being
Yeah.
told everything they want to hear in the same way that like Fox News has kind of perfected that like Pavlovian kind of government
Yeah.
or sorry, media reaction to everything with a very I mean, Roger Ailes is like on record basically saying like he started Fox News specifically to, undo the liberal bias or whatever, because like a lot of objective facts
Never
tend to
happened.
unfortunately have that liberal bias, and it goes down to the idea too that like Republicans, every time there's an issue that directly affects their life, they miraculously come around to the liberal perspective on it when they have a little bit of empathy, because it finally something actually affects them, whether it's John McCain and Torch or like women, and it's like Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene now voting with the Epstein stuff because of, I think Nancy Mace says she's been sexually assaulted before. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, the thing that affects your life, now you're taking the kind of liberal perspective on it, because otherwise you're just allowed to just ignore the fact that other people, like liberals, have empathy on some of these issues and are willing to spend money or attention or government effort solving problems that maybe don't even affect their own lives.
Yeah. And I think like where the funding comes from is another thing because people get into this assumption. It's like, well, the media is the way the media is because it makes money. But it's sort of like it can't be profitable to lose a court case because of you said the wrong thing about the election, the voting machines, right? They have to pay eight
Well, I
hundred
would say
million
for
dollars.
Fox News, it probably is. For them, that's probably just a cost of doing business, and take the
You
slap and
know,
lawsuit.
Well, it's but at some point, because I noticed that I wrote this article years and years ago that was the most popular article ever written for this paper, and then they didn't want to publish the follow up. So it's just sort of like there's some evidence that they don't really care about profit. It's more about propagandizing the people. And if we used to have the fairness doctrine, and that was taken away, I think, during Reagan. And so then you're just seeing this like media being used as a propaganda tool. We've seen these conglomerates buy up all the small papers, so local reporters are no longer able to be like, oh, so and such a politician met up with his mistress or whatever here. That's all just gone. We're just and the only information we have access to these days A lot of it is just of dubious origin. Maybe it's just completely AI invented. We're seeing AI articles all over the place. But the answer is, we just have to educate the public. I mean, we have to have some more media controls, clearly. The media can't just be a propaganda machine, but we also need a public that's educated enough to reject those propaganda things when they appear. But yeah, I just don't see much interest, like as you said, because the Democratic establishment doesn't seem willing to propose these ideas that would actually be winning ideas. They're essentially just, well, we're not them, and then it's like, well, what are you then? Is as far as they'll
Yeah.
go.
But don't you think we're kind of getting into that more kind of diverse media ecosystem now? I mean, like even like Twitter kind of falling apart. There's way more Twitter competitors with Threads and Blue Sky. Substack has blown up really,
Yeah.
really big. It might be like the fastest growing one in terms of like the more kind of traditional and like professional kind of media class. But like, like we both have channels that people
Yep.
are listening to. Like more people than ever before are able to start shows. I mean, it'll be, the ceiling is lower because it's so fractured, but are we just kind of in the early stages of a more kind of like Goldilocks media ecosystem where more people have voices and more people can get their messages across? Or is it
Yep.
worse, whereas everything's so siloed, it's just more and more like we're only in these weird little rabbit holes of our own algorithmic making that, we're just getting further and further from living in the same world anymore?
Well, no, I think definitely. I think the people, and again, that the will of the people. I think people are looking. They're fed up with it. They're fed up with being told the same old lies, and we're finding a way to make our audience hear. But at the same time, there's always going to be these malicious forces that put out the fire so that they have complete narrative control. So they're going to deliberately oppose us and make it impossible for us to have conversations like this. But I've also seen too, and what really disturbs me lately over the last couple weeks, and I think there's just as much because we all know that there's bot influence where I'll write an article and I'll just get 1,000 people telling me just awful insults and all these things, and they're trying to
Do you get a lot of
influence the
insults?
public perception. What's that?
Do you get a lot of insults and like kind of like negative comments?
Yeah, my some of my articles are aggregated on conservative platforms, and those are the place where I'll just get thousands of clearly false comments. But what I've noticed over time is I feel as if there is also a different type of bot that is designed to sow the seeds of division between otherwise like-minded people. When they start in with these, and they're different because they're not insults, but they'll use like a bunch of kind of they try to sway you with like 50-cent words, like academic sounding. And I think a lot of people will read that and be like, oh, that sounds smart. So that must be smart. Whereas I'm just stubborn and I'm just like, that word doesn't mean that. What the heck is that? And I found myself on more than one occasion checking these profiles, checking the other things that they say. And it's like, this claims to have 2,000 followers, but these aren't real people here.
Oh
So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
like
for sure.
there's these malicious entities there, and they divide us, and they emphasize because so much of what we talk about, like, it can be taken both ways, like the word like big tent. There's ways where you can look at that and it's like that's a really good concept, but there's ways we can look at it and it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think a first effort is just like, let's just make universal healthcare our rallying cry. That it's going to make it easier. It's like, let's bring the cost of groceries down, and then you see there's a lot more people who are allies. Because when we're talking about abstract concepts like, well, you know, progressive or democratic socialism won't work in red areas, that doesn't even mean anything. Tell me the specific programs you want to implement. And then I think we start to have more unity. But it's deliberate, and it's both the establishment Democrats and the MAGA that does that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think especially like that candidate in Maine, the oyster farmer dude, like I think like really kind of democratic socialists are you're probably right that like in very rural areas, they probably have way more in common with like democratic socialist candidates that are like kind of like fuck both parties and let's do things that actually help people. I think that gets way more traction than just a Democrat that's got a D next to his name that's not really offering anything new, but that might actually, but again, it all comes down to the local candidates too, like who will win the primaries. Like that's a big thing,
Yeah.
is just who decides to run. If there's only kind of like centrist Democrats running,
Yeah.
and there aren't any like really engaged democratic socialists of like, hey, let's do things to actually improve our problems and not just be like just purely a D vote against the R vote and stay in the same kind of like bipolar partisan system that we have right now.
Absolutely. And I think you said another important thing because because the establishment Democrats get all haughty about the idea of primaries. They act like, well, we're wasting resources on these primaries and we should be better using those resources to defeat the Republicans. And then we elect some centrist Democrat who sabotages our own party. Like Joe Manchin, he withheld his vote. He was the one who killed Build Back Better, and this was this really progressive legislation. Had that passed, maybe our inflation rate would have dropped at much faster than it did. Maybe that
Yeah.
would have been a cakewalk in for us to get. And we never even talk about that. It's just sort of like, well, and then Manchin didn't even run again. So what does he got to lose? Vote for some progressive stuff. Vote for stuff that actually helps people. But it upsets me that that's never part of even really the establishment discussion. The establishment quickly wanted to pivot to, well, Kamala's a woman and she was black, so that's why she lost. We can't talk about anything else. And then they refuse to talk about the potential of election fraud. It's like, let's just do some recounts in swing states just for the sake of threatening them to not engage in election fraud. Even if we don't find anything, we're serious about this. But just to roll
Yeah.
over, be like,
Right.
that's just
But
that
on the
makes
other
sense.
hand, with Joe Manchin, he was that last vote needed for a majority. So wouldn't you rather we had Joe Manchin still right now, and then Democrats had the Senate majority or something like that? If we had two or three more Joe Manchins, isn't I
Yeah,
think Ezra Klein
that's a
gets
good
into
point.
this a lot. It's just like you can't do anything if you don't have the majority and you don't have power, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
wouldn't you prefer we had 100 Joe Manchins right now and majority control of both chambers of Congress to investigate Trump? Just throwing out devil's advocate a little bit.
No, but this is good. And this is exactly the type of thing where it's like, oh, this is kind of a place where there's a little disagreement, but I think we have a unique goal. We have the same goal and different ideas of how to get there. And my thought is what's the point of spending resources on a guy like Joe Manchin if when he gets into office, he votes against you? And how many people does it alienate? And then it's like, maybe somebody else could win because to get him in there, the establishment deliberately suppresses, the more progressive Democrats who and then they blame progressive Democrats whenever they lose. Oh, we lost because of that. It's like, no, it's because your centrist policies are not popular. And it's been shown again and again and again. I mean, Obama got in and he was much more of a moderate actual politician, but just the promise of Obama was extremely progressive. And Biden ran on a much more progressive platform than Hillary. And it is frustrating when we talk about how much of this is sexism and how much of it is racism, and all that's valid. But at the same time, this insistence, this reluctance to even say, it's like, let's support a couple more. Like they spend money. It's like they spend money to oppose AOC and they spend money to oppose Mamdani. And where's the argument about wouldn't that money be better spent trying to win a red district than to prevent a progressive from getting in? But I mean, your point is right. I mean, he did eventually sign the infrastructure bill, and
Yeah.
he signed a
I
couple
mean,
other things.
because right now it's hard to imagine West Virginia will ever elect a Democrat again, in at least a generation, right? But Joe Manchin won by 3% of the vote in 2018, and in a time when Trump won the state both times by plus 30, R plus 38 or something like that. But I had this thought, maybe I was wondering what you think about this. Almost I feel like Democrats almost should do more of a states' rights things with their candidates in terms of I think Democrats spend so much effort doing things that are unpopular in a lot of states and districts with, kind of the litmus testing, the kind of criticism about the groups and all of that, that basically Democrats are just losing elections because when they get into power, they do so many things that are unpopular in so many areas that I wonder if maybe, it's and this might be a good point to discuss. It's in the 2020 election with all the people on stage and they're raise your hands if you would approve the government spending money to give people illegal immigrants in prison transgender sex operations. And they, because of the litmus test, they all had to raise their hands. A couple of them were a little slow to do it, but it's just that is such an unpopular position that affects come on, illegal immigrants in prison who want to become transgender. That is such a niche thing that has to affect zero point 0 something percent of the population. But then Democrats nationally lose because all Republican campaign ads are about that. It's all about the transports. And I'm not saying throw trans people under the bus because I perfectly respect trans people. They should have the same rights as everybody. But I think Democrats taking the states' rights things of just more Democrats should be I don't give a fuck about that issue. I'm not going to answer it. I like trans people. I will not give money to give like illegal immigrants in prison sex changes. And I think kind of more Democrats should get rid of the that kind of litmus test idea of I have to have the perfect opinion that's been poll tested on every single issue. And then part of that, I think Democratic voters are getting a little bit better about this. But when you get like, I notice this all the time on social media. Like Stephen King made one bad joke, right? And then everyone's like, Stephen King is trash. I always hated him. He
Yeah.
was always the worst. And it's like all these people that you know, if you looked up Twitter and like all of their tweets, they'd be retweeting Stephen King for literally probably like 20 years or like 20
Yeah.
years at this point or whatever, 15 years, however Twitter's been around. But the idea that so many Democrats want to just kick out anybody of the tent for one minor transgression is so, so frustrating. And I notice this all the time. And I think more and more, it's like the boy who cried wolf a little bit. A lot of those Democratic attacks, not even really Democratic attacks, it's like those kind of like hyper woke, like lynch mobs that you see online that want to just cast everybody out and call them worse than Hitler for like some extreme minor microaggression. Like that is so annoying. And it just feeds into the Republican, campaign ads every time because now, and this kind of goes into like to play kind of devil's advocate with that, it's like the idea of like Democrats being socialists and communists. Like part of me is like Democrats will always be called that every single election, no matter if you're Pete Buttigieg or you're like, the corpse of Ho Chi Minh that got dug up and ran as a communist Democrat. Like no matter what Democrats do, they're going to get called communists and socialists. So why not actually do, progressive democratic socialist things that people will actually like and create that enthusiasm that helps get like, weird candidates and weird districts elected because of that enthusiasm thing. So I threw a lot there, but, and
Yeah.
some of it's conflicting, but like, it's like the world is very complex and nuanced and like sometimes diametrically opposed ideas and positions are true in different places at the same time,
Yeah, I'll do my best to answer that. There's a lot of good stuff. But I'll say, first of all, absolutely we have to protect transgender people. And I won't vote for the Democrats if they start surrendering any group of people. And I think that's a fair way to answer it. It's like
Well, what if it's
we
not
have
even
to protect all
surrendering?
people.
What if more
But
Democrats
see,
were just
see,
like, I don't care. It's like somewhere there's a transgender swimmer like competing. Can't Democrats just be like, I don't care. That's that issue for that state or that district or that high school. And I, as a presidential aspirant, am not going to get in the weeds on some insanely niche issue that affects literally 100 people in one small town or something.
yeah, it'll be even less than 100 because there's only like a couple athletes that even applies to. But
Right,
but I
right.
mean, we have to. I mean, we can't do anything that even gives the appearance that we're gonna. I think that's fundamental. We can't surrender anybody, and it's the first they came argument. We have to support all these people, and so if an argument like that is enough to lose an election, it shows just the complete lack of integrity of the people of the United States. If they're willing to surrender groups of people, and I think it's just a more powerful argument. And I think a lot of too, like this division is what you're talking about. It comes from the bots. I think they're establishment bots. They're trying to sink candidates. I think they give these because that question, the one about the in prisons and all this, there's like 6 layers to that question. You're talking about immigrants, you're talking about transgender people, you're talking about prison, you're talking about sex change surgery. There's like 6 things in that sentence
Right.
that are designed to trigger the right and make any answer, gonna make people angry. But we always have to say too, we have to be careful because sometimes an answer might be will get you one right-wing voter, but it's going to lose 100 left-wing voters. And I think we don't talk about that enough. So
Well, what
always,
about the
always,
moderate
we have to
moderate
protect all
independent
people.
voters though? I feel like the problem is that Democrats lose, like a solid, like especially those like transgender like ads. I think polls and studies show that they were pretty effective. And, that was like the most effective wedge issue for Republicans. Republicans are so good at wedge issues where they
Yeah.
they fool all their voters into forgetting how much Republicans are ruining their lives and livelihoods and just screwing them over and keeping their like super rural red areas like all on food stamps and all these things that they hate anyway. But what do you make of like the Ezra Klein comments about like the groups and a lot of like the kind of pushback of like where like the whole Democratic National Party needs to focus X amount of time on these issues that affect so few people? and in a way that's unpopular for independent, moderate voters who don't even
Yeah.
pay attention to politics, but then they just see the ads that, oh, here's Democrat. You know, it's like the healthcare right now. How many Republicans right now are just like, this shutdown is because Democrats want to give illegal immigrants health insurance? It's wrong. It's a lie.
Yeah.
But it literally convinced a election winning number of moderate and independent voters that Democrats need to either stay out or vote Republican because they think Democrats have lost their minds a little bit. Or they
Well,
don't react, Democrats have no relation to like real life for most people or something.
this is a consequence of ineffective Democratic messaging. And if Democrats would just start saying, we're for universal health care, we're for universal health care, protecting the rights of all the people, they can win these arguments. And they're just not doing it. I mean, Democrats try to leave it, like Republicans campaign 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, whether there's an election that year or not. You can find all of their hate right wing conservative radio propagandizing the population all the time. And then the Democrats think, well, we can just do like a hour and a half debate and change minds, change all that conditioning. And I think we just really need to establish it's like, yeah, they're telling things that are not true. And it's to the point like the Black Lives Matter protests were all peaceful. They didn't become violent until the Nazis showed up and started attacking them. That there's studies that show that. A big part of the population just doesn't believe that's true. A big part of the population doesn't believe in the moon landing. A big part of the population, thinks the earth is flat. And it's sort of like we can't have a Democratic Party
Yeah.
that's like, well, I understand that some people think that the earth is flat, so I'm going to be respectful. Because you say that, I'm like, no, you start losing all these people that don't have a voice. So really, the Democratic Party just has to find its integrity. We're going to stand up for
Yeah.
everybody's rights. Transgender people are people. We're standing up for their rights. We don't want cruelty in prison. You're going to have your rights defended
Right.
in prison because we're not going to torture people in prison. And we're not going to torture people with sexual reassignment. Or what is it called? The conversion therapy is the thing that they're saying. And it's like most of the sexual affirming care is boys getting breast reduction. I mean, say the truth of the thing. I think there was 100. I looked it up. I'm not going. These numbers aren't going to be quite right, but it was like 157 cases, 57 cases, and 155 of them were boys getting breast reduction. So it's like just inform people what the reality is,
Yeah.
and we
But in
can't
terms of
do. We
politics,
can't
you
allow
kind of
them to
can't.
coerce us into. I'm
But
sorry.
in terms of politics, you kind of can't do that. Like, you had a good answer there, but then it's like you lose all the, it's like Democrats do that and they get called egghead professors that talk down to everybody and then lose elections. So like, for instance, like Ezra Klein had a good point. Ezra Klein is kind of like that, where like no one is like more liberal and wants Democrats to win more than Ezra Klein. But now some of his like recent articles that he's been doing, people are like, he's trash. Take him out of the party. Let's never listen to him again. But he does have good points in terms of you're right. The Democrats want to be the party for everybody, especially all the people that aren't just like white patriarchal Christian males that Republicans kind of invented identity politics around. But you look at 2020 and Democrats lost more Hispanic votes. They lost more Black votes. They lost more female votes. They lost more young votes. So, clearly what Democrats are doing is not helping them win elections, and they are not getting the power to help these groups of people that really they're the only kind of backstop in politics for. But you can't argue that they're losing the very groups of people they are patting
Yeah.
themselves on the back for saying we're the only ones doing anything. It's like literally losing them elections and losing the electorates that they are literally losing independent and moderate voters trying to protect above all political expediency.
That's an interesting because it says I would argue we've lost those groups because they failed to stand up for integrity and they failed to defend the transgender. I mean, and we see, and also there's vote suppression, and it's like the Democrats haven't stood up. That's another thing they could have pushed through is the John Lewis voter civil Voting Rights Act. They could have pushed that through. End all this gerrymandering. And there's just it's like we really do have to get over this assumption that that we're going to drive voters away if we go progressive, because the establishment pushes that really hard. And I think if we were just truthful about helping people, we just say we're going to help people. But I think they don't want to make those arguments, and that goes to because this is why the right will make these absurd attack arguments and the Democrats just don't respond. And then they lose an election and they say, see, we were being too woke, even though they never were woke. They never did give those ads, right? They never did it. They never made the promises. We're going to fix your health care. We're going to get rid of those premiums. They don't say those things because they're afraid to do that because they're MAGA light. They're happy with the injustices because about half of the Democrats enrich themselves. I mean, there's no reason that politicians should be selling stocks, right? And a lot of our
Yeah, yeah,
guys
for
do it.
sure.
So
Well, do you
they
what do you
don't
make
like
about
that
like
system.
what do you think about even like Bernie Sanders with that real progressive, unprecedentedly popular like democratic socialism agenda? But even he was constantly criticized by the very woke people for the Bernie bro idea of just it's all white people. He can't win an election because blacks and Hispanics are not voting for Bernie. Like to some degree, like a lot of the progressive candidates that Democrats do have, they do kind of make all of those kind of like woke issues take a backseat, like sit on the bench while they're kind of talking a more general one size fits all economic populist agenda and not getting kind of like wound around the axle on some of those unpopular issues.
Yeah.
So even in terms of like the successful progressive politics, they kind of stay away from the and I think I would say with most woke things, I agree with all of those sentiments. I believe that, everything Republicans are doing is way wrong and stupid. And it's like a new Red Scare kind of about wokeism where
Yeah.
they just, it's like, is the woke in the room right now with you? Where are they? That kind of
Yeah.
thing. But like, you can't argue that a lot of that woke stuff really, it all comes down to winning elections. And it's like, it did scare away a lot of centrist, normie, moderate, low educated,
Well,
low enthusiasm voters, right?
no, we know that they lost, but we don't know if it's because of the woke stuff. I mean, all we know is, see, we got to be a little more scientific, and the establishment pushes this because the first thing the establishment does every time somebody loses is they turn around and blame progressives, you know. But I mean, Mamdani just had a very successful campaign where he just is like not even talking about the right. He's like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. I'm
Yeah.
going to help people. I'm going to go after the rich people that aren't paying enough. And
Right.
the reality is, at the it's instantly after an election is over and the Democrats have lost, instantly the centrist Democrats start blaming progressives. They start blaming woke stuff. This stuff, it floods your, and I think it's bots. I don't think these are real people. It floods your comments where they're blaming these things. You start ending up in arguments with random profiles because the establishment doesn't want to be a party of integrity that cuts off, their source of funds from all these corrupt systems. So I think we get a lot of false blame. I think if we pivot hard, I think we pivot hard into woke values and all the good things and integrity and helping the working class, and we unapologetically and defiantly say we stand for that, and we for the first time say we do stand for these issues. We stand for immigrants unapologetically, unreservedly. We're going to help trans people because trans people are people. I think if we pivoted and did that, we'd start to win. And the reality is we've been losing all these elections because we've been trying to do this tightrope of like appeasing centrists and the right, and we just disregard progressives entirely.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't Mamdani a good example of like he didn't get wrapped around the axle around all that stuff? He stayed focused on free buses, lower cost of living, and the grocery store idea. Like,
That's
isn't
true.
that kind of a testament to like just stay focused on the things that affect everybody and stop trying to? I think Democrats hurt themselves
Yeah,
when they get into the habit of just calling what makes up an election winning majority of the country racist, sexist, and I think a lot of those people are legitimately racist and sexist and all of the isms and things like that. But again, it comes down to
yeah,
politics. And it's like, I think Democrats have, it's like the deplorable idea. I agree with like, not, I think, Hillary Clinton calling Trump's voters deplorable was not a good political move. I would say like a lot of Republicans in Congress are pretty deplorable. I don't think it's election winning to just write off a big chunk of the electorate
yeah,
as deplorable like she did. So it's definitely a put your foot in your mouth kind of
yeah,
situation there. However, it's like it's democracy is like you need 50% plus one vote. So anything you're doing
yeah,
that makes those like the people that are not just like Pavlovian straight ticket R or straight ticket Ds, you need those people that are convincible and you need to convince them that you're not crazy or you're not inauthentic. Like I feel like it is a big problem that so many voters will say, it's like Democrats' approval rating is like 28% right now. It's lower
yeah,
than Trump's. And it's because so many voters think Democrats are just obsessed with these like like the groups, like these groups of people that are a very small segment of the population. And I think, part of
well,
it
I don't
too
think it's
is,
that reason. Let me not
uh,
interrupt because I don't think it's that
no, yeah,
reason. I
you're
don't think
fine.
it's that. I think people are upset with them because they're not fighting back against fascists right now. And again, the establishment wants always to control these narratives. They see that their approval rating is low, and they're like, "See, it's because of the progressives," and they never like give it a fair shot. I like
Yeah,
what you
but when
said
you
about
look at
Clinton, though.
Yeah, when you look at the Senate, though, like, like Chris Murphy, is he the Democratic establishment or is he relatively progressive? Like, go down the list of all, like, other than maybe like the eight who just agreed to cave in. I would say maybe those are more of like the establishment Democrats. But like most Democratic senators and most Republican House or most Democratic House members are kind of people that, like, when you hear their campaign speeches, they probably talk a lot about the issues that you like, right? So, like,
Yeah.
to me, it is almost like the Democratic Party kind of becomes an abstract thing because really the Democratic, like most
Yeah.
Democrats hate and
Yep.
campaign against the Democratic Party.
You're right, and it's like any community is diverse and big, but I think we just can't overlook. I mean, we just have to criticize the establishment. Democrats need to get an equal amount of criticism, and they don't. And I mean, like talking about Clinton. I mean, Hillary Clinton, and she would have been miles better than what we got. But it's like, how is that your centrist candidate? Because the right hates her. You're not going to win any Republicans by running Hillary Clinton. And then look at the extreme lengths they had to go to. I mean, they awarded her like half the delegates she needed before the primaries even began. And I think people are really frustrated with the Democrats for that, where like Mamdani wins his primary and they don't respect it. They refuse to endorse him. I mean, that kind of thing is really offensive. And that doesn't have to do with, like the woke argument. But I think, too, a lot of it is the establishment Democrats deliberately sabotage a lot of the progressive candidates and a lot of the false messaging where they kind of distracted. Because it seems like the establishment Democrats are pretty content to be on one side of the tennis court, like bop, 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 bouncing power back and forth with a fascist. And then when a progressive is like on the other side, starts getting attention, like, look at what we could have. Both the establishment and the Republicans start throwing mud at that person. And then we end up in this big mess where it's hard to kind of even sort through who's being honest and who isn't. And then on top of that, we got all the AI comments that who knows the
Yeah.
legitimacy of those. So it's
No,
confusing.
what do you make of the Democratic strategy in a lot of like red states that's more and more is like, hey, let's find an independent that says he
Yeah.
hates the fucking DNC and
Yeah.
just give him all the money and not even do a
Yeah.
primary of like establishment style Democrats, and let's just have an independent who will hopefully caucus us with at the end, or at least not be a fucking radical MAGA
Yeah.
idiot.
I love
Like, is
that
that a good
idea.
strategy?
I love it. I love it because the Democrats don't even try to win red states, which is a problem because there's a lot of blue voters in red states who never get any representation. But I think the
Yeah.
establishment Democrats are going to quash that idea too because I think they see that as a threat to power. I think they don't have. I mean, they're refusing. These are smart people. Like the establishment Democrats, they're multimillionaires. They all had private tutors. They all went to Ivy League schools. And they're completely, you're telling me they're completely incapable of coming up with messaging that would win over the entire country when people are paying like these ridiculous healthcare premiums and they're going broke and there's no food and there's no jobs and everything's going to shit. They know how to fix this. They're deliberately, making it a mess. They want to be close to the vest so they retain their power. And they close off. I mean, they close off our primaries because they don't want working class people representing us. There's only millionaires in Congress, and people that have been in the seat for 100 years. So it's like all this is by design, all the control. And so, and I applaud you and I thank you so much for bringing me because it's like, yeah, we had at times there was like the appearance of a disagreement, and I spent the whole week thinking about it. I'm like, oh, Dash thinks this, and it's like I'm trying to figure out, and so it's like, and everything. I mean, the things you're saying make sense. It's like we're trying to look at these things, but we do have to be careful about maybe we could collect a voter here. We can't just focus on that. We have to say, oh, shoot, this voter made us lose 10 voters. So that's a net loss. And we have to like let's just commit to integrity. And prior to this election too, I mean, I've always been like, okay, I'm gonna just shut up. I'm gonna shut up and do what the establishment says because
Yeah.
maybe they know. And now I'm a
Well, I think more
50-year-old
candidate.
man, so I'm just getting grumpy. And I'm just like, no, god damn it. I don't have that
Yeah.
much time left, so I'm gonna say the things I want and loud.
Well, I think that's what more Democrats should do. I think we need more candidates just swinging for the fences, and especially in the
Yeah.
primaries. Like I thought about this even myself. Like I mean, obviously with the halfway post and all the shit I've written, like I feel like I'm pretty unelectable. But someday I think it
Yeah.
would be fun to like run in a primary just to be like on a debate
Yeah.
stage and like just say the shit that I think, and
Yes. Yes.
maybe the ideas will go further than my candidacy will because I'll go nowhere. They'll pull up the shit I've written about like religion and God and and
Yeah.
random things that I've satirized. But I had this idea too. I was wondering, this is like kind of a pet idea that I've been having, but I feel like our partisan politics have gotten so much worse. And this will sound bad at first, but stay with me. But I feel like we should bring back pork barrel spending, right? You remember for like years, there was like a big thing, all this pork barrel spending. They sent all these monies to like, candidates or like representatives and senators states. But I feel like our politics have gotten worse since we stopped basically bribing senators and representatives with big money projects for their states to get them to vote the way like the party wants. So I think if like
Yeah.
we could have more legislation, if you could get random senators and be like, hey, you know that bridge you want in Cincinnati or whatever,
Yeah.
we'll give you $500 million in this earmarked like amendment to this plan if you vote for it. And I think because we've gotten rid of all of that, unfortunately, that was like a maybe successful sausage making ugly process of how things got done. But in the 60s and 70s and 80s, like America still built stuff and still did big things because of that. And some of it was just
Yeah.
bribing these representatives and senators for their votes. But at least the kind of pork barrel bribes were helping, like, some construction project or some subsidy that helps
Yeah.
their state or something like that. Any feedback on that? I'm not totally willing to die on that hill, but it's something that I've been playing around in my head a bit.
That's why I mean, our politicians are corrupt. I mean, the amount of money that they're getting, the kickbacks, and because they all invest in the corporations, and then they
Yeah, but now they
basically,
get that stuff personally. But at least this is like helping their constituents in a way of like, what senator doesn't want a
yeah,
bridge that is really important to the economy of their local community that's named after them because they got it through by like sneaking in some pork barrel earmark and some
yeah.
random bill. You know what I mean?
It could be though that they're because they well, it's interesting. I'm thinking about it because I mean, we got these billionaires who then just essentially buy these politicians. So maybe are we at a point where senators can't have their votes swayed by what would help the people? I mean, because they really are beholden to their oligarch who, funds everything
Right.
about them. So maybe, I mean, I think just the level of corruption is hard to even fathom right now. And it's been, Citizens United and corporations making, and then it's like you see politicians quitting office and then getting some, highly paid job after all these unfair things that they push through. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't,
you
I
know,
don't have an
you know,
answer there. Nope, don't have an answer.
there's some communities, like especially in like South America, the idea of like, well, he steals from the government, but at least he
Yeah,
steals for us. Like, that's like maybe that would be the
yeah.
trickle down that actually finally, helps people. Again,
Well,
I'm
yeah, a
not
lot of those
really
drug
totally dying
dealers.
on that hill, but just a fun idea because now it's like, now it's like, especially in the like the House, like the Speaker of the House controls everything. Nothing really goes through the old Speaker
Yeah,
system or the committee process like it used to. So like right now you get into the House and you have no power, you can't do anything. Everything's controlled by the Speaker. And now finally with this like discharge petition, they finally have some framework to get a vote on things around the Speaker of the
yeah,
House. But it's just like the kind of power consolidation. And like you hear Republicans constantly campaign about this and talk about it, just that like they can't do anything and like all the power has been removed from the representatives.
yeah,
And it's, you get those strong speakers like Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, that just like nothing's happening without their explicit endorsement.
I think a lot of it, and I keep thinking back on the idea. I did an interview yesterday with Michelle TeHue, and from the days of like just the local community newspaper, and how and back then, you'd have a newsroom and people would have to kind of sort out their ideas there. And you'd have a diverse group within the newsroom and you'd present the news
Yeah.
after it had gone through like a process. And now we have this where all the newsroom is gone. And now we have a bunch of like just, corporate owned news or people like us that are like these fringe things, but everybody's kind of got their idea and there's not as much of that kind of discussing ideas and coming out to a happy medium. It's like over the last 15 years, that's kind of gone. And I think
Right.
that's a big part of why we're seeing this division. And then you add to it social media and the algorithms that promote hate content deliberately. They're inciting people. But I think
Right.
human beings do have I think Lincoln remains right when he's like, you can't fool all the people all the time. And I think the
Yeah.
power, I mean, people are leaving social media. They're fed up with it and they're looking for other, just other narratives because it's like, it's the same thing. They keep passing the ball back and forth, but nothing really changes. So I think people are ready for something new. And the cherry on top of all that is the Epstein files, which might, we might see just a massive, a bunch of assets seized, like trillions of dollars of assets seized if this gets through. And it might require a lot more activism and deliberate action on our part. But I mean, losing's not an option. So I guess that's what we have to do, right?
Yeah. Now, I had another idea too. I wish we could go back to the kind of like states as, like there used to be the idea like states were their own like private laboratories kind of for like
Oh yeah,
national politics. But now everything is so national, you don't get any of that. And that's kind of what like the founding fathers intended when they thought, like Washington was warning like no political parties. But it used to be like, people were from their states and they considered themselves like Virginians or Oklahomans or Missourians, like prior to even sometimes really being like
oh
an
yeah,
American. But it'd be nice too if, like, instead of having these like diametrically opposed,
yeah,
bipolar, totally nationalist systems where if you're just a Republican, you kind of know how you're going to vote like on almost everything because that's just how our politics
yeah,
are. But it would be nice if you kind of kicked more power to the states a little bit. And this kind of goes back to democratic strategies because like it's frustrating that things like Obamacare, they do these big sweeping things or they propose these big sweeping things to affect the entire country. But then a lot of states don't want it. It doesn't work. One size fits all policy doesn't really work. And then
yeah,
Democrats lose elections. They lose all their power. And then they're back into the wilderness because they tried to help
yeah,
people. But like, I wonder if it would, I mean, obviously this is, it's a little negative for Democrats to like stop worrying about like the Republicans, in red states that don't do anything for people to kind of kick them to the curb. But like, it sucks that so often Democrats get electorally punished for helping the very voters that elect the
yeah,
most cynical, bomb throwing Republicans that obstruct everything
yeah,
and don't want the government to exist. So it would be nice if you kind of got back to a little bit of like states actually having some like autonomy. And then it's like more, you can see which ideas work or don't work. And, there's plenty of like, there's plenty of reasons that like Republicans, have good ideas that maybe Democrats would be more akin to trying that work out in that kind of like states' rights, states as laboratories kind of idea. But, I just hate how much, like Obamacare is the perfect example where like
yeah,
it literally lost Democrats the entire Congress in 2010, right? This massive shift. And like now, fast forward 15 years, it was a good idea. 25
yeah,
million people who otherwise would not have health insurance have it. But it's like Democrats got punished for it. And then, a lot of like the insanity of our politics now is directly related to that
yeah.
2009, 2010 Obamacare fight, where Republicans really went off the rails and have never quite lived in reality the same ever since.
Yeah, and I think that's the messaging fight. I mean, the Democrats just they don't convey, they don't educate the population, and they retreat from those fights too. I mean, the
Yeah,
more
they are
money we
pussies
could
who
dump into
retreat from a
education.
fight.
What's that? Yeah,
Yeah, Democrats are pussies who back down constantly in the most annoying fashion, right?
yeah, and just
The recent
accepting. Yeah,
caveman on the government shutdown is a perfect example.
yeah, and I think that's why people get frustrated, and it's it's by design because I think they're just content to have things be pretty bad, and they're
Yeah.
just content and never really working to make things better, and they just know that people are going to get frustrated with the Republicans and go back to the Democrats. But I mean, I think Biden actually got sabotaged by the Democratic Party. I think Kamala Harris was too, because they were way more progressive than we thought they would be. I mean, Biden, I get the impression he was like a nice old grandfather. He's like, yeah, let's have a good happy Christmas to everybody, And the establishment's like, ooh, because you just need a little taste of how much better our lives could be. And so they walk that fine line. They're like, we're not the Republicans, but then they don't offer anything. And it's like, and then when somebody does, then they get really nervous and sabotage their own candidates. And so I think that's why everybody's frustrated with the Democrats. But we'll see. I mean, I think, like you said at the beginning, this Epstein thing, the repercussions of that, I have no idea. And I mean, no, most of the time in my life, I've had kind of okay, I can predict this. Last year, I've had no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea at all. And
I have no idea what's happening right now in the hour we've been talking. Any more Epstein emails just drop? Who knows?
oh boy, yeah. Hmm.
Well, any last thoughts you wanna throw in? Anything you wanna shamelessly promote?
Oh no, I just want to say I really appreciate you coming on. We had a couple like a couple things we would said in that last talk, and I'm just like, well, I don't really agree with that. But then I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, what does he mean? And so I just appreciate the opportunity to come out. This is a case of this is what disagree and still be friends should mean. And then we talk it through, and we're like, oh, now I totally understand what he meant. And I think we just live in this society that forces us to like react in a way that's not helpful. So I applaud you for chatting with me, and I learned a lot. I've learned a lot just even since I first proposed that we start having this conversation. 'Cause I've been thinking it over. So this has been a wonderful talk. So
Yeah, a
thank
lot
you.
of food for thought for everybody. Yeah,
I hope so.
thanks everybody for listening. I guess I'll shamelessly promote my book. I write
Oh,
satire. I've got satire in the Trump years, satire in the Biden years. I got two versions of this of the last 8 years of my comedy. So if you like my work with the Halfway Post and what I write on Substack on the Halfway Cafe, check out those books. I've also got some poetry books you can buy on Amazon as
nice.
well.
I'm
Shameless
gonna look
plug
at those.
over. Yeah. Hey, yeah, I think they're funny. They say write the book you want to read, and that's definitely what I
Yep.
did. If you hate Trump, like this is full. It's like mostly Trump. Even my satire in the
Yep.
Biden years from the Biden presidency,
Oh,
still
good.
like 95% making fun of Trump. So,
Well, I
but
always tell people support the fringe voices and don't support the
yeah,
millionaires because you know
yeah,
what
true that.
supporting the millionaires gets you. So we appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Good to talk to you, Walter. We'll do this again
Yeah, thank you.
sometime, and let's
Absolutely.
all go check out what's going on with the Epstein files, right?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
See you, everybody. Thanks for
Have a
listening to
good
Brain
day.
Milk. Toodle.